revolutionary movement for its overthrow, which was successful. And we acknowledge all the contributions that she made despite the suffering that was heaped upon her. And we know that through her efforts that Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island. So we remember Sister Winnie Mandela and all the positive contributions, and let her memory live on for as long as possible. Long live Winnie Mandela.
Long live Winnie Mandela.
Long live the memory of Winnie Mandela.
Long live the memory of Winnie Mandela.
Amandla.
Amandla.
Amandla. Listen to Zaid. Amandla.
Awetu.
Amandla.
Awetu.
Amandla.
Awetu.
Amandla.
Awetu.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
It's an exciting time. We've been working on it, and one of the things I can say with the group, it has been a collective effort. We communicated, we shared ideas, and we made decisions collaboratively. So tonight, it's honor women in the struggle, never bind their wings, they were made to soar. And you know we have been made to soar. And we will continue to soar.
Go ahead.
It's special because one of the things, I love pop women. Okay, and I'm willing to stand with the pop women against any other group of women. Not to say that the other women are not doing their thing, but I know that the pop women are strong women who have histories of community engagement, who have history of loving black people and loving their own people, because all pop women are not black, and are committed to the struggle for social justice at any cost, who are tireless, and we come out of a legacy of strong women, and had it not been for them, we would not be here today. Okay, and that's not just in the United States, but internationally. So with that, we're going to call one of our strong black women in the community. And Chairman Ham sort of started, it gave some background, but one of the things about Mildred is that she is a servant leader. Okay. Her philosophy, her engagement, it's about people. Okay, it's about bettering the condition. I've been places where I've seen the Honorable Mildred Crump roll up her sleeve, go behind the serving line, and serve the people. Okay, and that's and also in all kinds of places. She's fearless. I hope to be able to be who you are in terms of strength, and we love you, Mildred. So we're going to call Mildred up, the Honorable Mildred. We need to give her respect to give you welcome on behalf of the city.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
If there were no power, if there were no people, there'd be no power. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
I greet you this evening in the spirit of freedom. For those of you who may not know very much about my history, my life has been devoted to the struggle for freedom. My grandparents, let me rephrase. I stand before you this evening, the granddaughter of slaves. And every summer of my life, I was sent south. Anybody can relate to that? Yes. I was sent down south to a little town called Cuthbert, Georgia. And I spent the summers with my grandparents. I learned much from them. And I'd like to believe that their spirit is embedded in what I do and because of what they experienced. And so it's really an honor for me to stand before you and welcome you to the great city of Newark. Before I do that, there are a couple of mementos that I want to share with you. I too honor the memory of Winnie Mandela, one of our women warriors. But I would be remiss if I did not call this warrior woman to your memory, Mary Weaver. I couldn't help but tear up a little bit when I saw the sign. It was because, I won't say just because, but because of Mary and Marion. I saw her, Marion, come in, that I actually got involved. I was impressed with Larry, but it was those two women who invited me to join the Sisterhood of Warrior Women. And so I honor them as I stand before you. For every generation, there was a voice that cries out in the wilderness. And in the greater Newark area, we have such a voice. There isn't too much that I would not do, that I would not say, that I would not commit to Larry Ham. I do remember those days when Pop had no money, and I had a couple of dollars. Plus, I had access to stamps. And those were good times, Larry, when you think about it. Everything that we did in those days was honest. There was no ulterior motive. You know, there was nothing that was a hidden agenda. We were just about freeing the people so that they could free themselves. I love Ingrid. And thank you so much for that kind and wonderful introduction. Certainly to my sisters in the struggle, political struggle. You know I love both of you. We stand united and together. And I don't know of any other organization that could bring the three of us, because I know Donna, she's a warrior woman. I mean, she's fierce. Just in case you all don't know, she's fierce. And right behind her is my council friend from Montclair, Renee. So the three of us, I started to say the Holy Trinity, but let me not go there. let me not take too many liberties. Let me welcome you to the great city of Newark. For those of you who do not reside within our borders. As you know, Newark was, Black Newark, let me say this, was founded by people who realized that we actually had a place in the sun. And as Newark has grown and has become more cosmopolitan and more interracial and just more family driven. And when I say family, I'm not talking about brother, sister, mother, father. I'm talking about by the spirit of freedom. It is just a pleasure to be with you. I miss coming to the meetings as I used to be able to, but I love my job. And I really do. I love what I do, even during the bad times, But the city of Newark is always welcome to you whenever, and whatever I can do personally, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Feels good to be here tonight. Next, she's not aware of it, but we would like to bring up Councilwoman and Dr. Baskerville. Okay. So we have to work hard for that MD degree. To give greetings on behalf of the city of Montclair. You're welcome.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
What an honor. I was not aware that I was going to stand here this evening, but it's always great to have an opportunity. I'd like not to bring greetings from the Township of Montclair, although I am honored to serve there. I'd like to take a moment and also just to reflect on E. Wyman Garrett, Dr. Garrett. And a lot of who I am today I owe to him. And I'm going to go back to, gosh, 1977. And I was about a junior in Oberlin College in Ohio. I was a good time. I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I was politically astute and conscious. I was one of the Uhuru Sasa dancers with Ras Baraka's mother at Seafun in Newark. We used to Seafun, Seafun. And so I was not totally living in a bubble and unaware of what needed to happen. But I was walking down on Broad Street in Newark, and Dr. Garrett walked over to me for whatever reason. I call it God. And he said, hey, you know, what are you doing? Who are you? And the conversation started. And the end of that conversation was he mentioned to me that he was on the board of directors at the University of Medicine and Dentistry here in Newark. Dean Bergen was the dean at that time, and he was going to make sure that any hospital that was in his neighborhood that was predominantly black people had black representation in the medical school, and at that time there were very few. And he offered me a position to come to the Students for Medicine program, and then it was called University of Medicine Dentistry. You know the name is Rutgers now, but it'll always be UMD&J to me, and in honoring Dr. Garrett's memory. And that's how my career in medicine began. I went to the Students for Medicine program that he was instrumental in getting me into. He then came to Oberlin, Ohio. He wrote letters of recommendation. He insisted that this girl from Montclair, New Jersey, that really was not grounded in what I wanted to do in terms of career. I was a cellist, and so I had my cello, and I loved music, and I thought I was going to do the music thing. And he said, well, you can do both. But he sat me down and talked to me about keeping the lights on and then walking around with the cello, thinking that I was going to do something. And because of him, I was granted a seat in the medical school. I went on to medical school there. I was not a strong student when I entered because I found studying until that point was easy for me. And so I really never mastered how to study. And so I remember my second year there, and I was having some difficulties, and who shows up but Dr. Garrett? And Dr. Garrett came in there and said, oh, hey, little black girl, the white guys are telling little black girls, about 20 white guys with suits on sitting looking at me around a table, and they said, oh, we think you're more suited to become a med tech. Dr. Garrett walks through the door. I'm telling, again, I call it God. Dr. Garrett said, she is going to be a physician. She is going to graduate. I have witnessed her calling to serve the people of Newark. And no way were they going to kick this little black girl out and try to discourage me from what he described to me as my calling. And so to this day, while we celebrate and uplift women, I just want to let you know how inestimably grateful I am to E. Wyman Garrett. And Ernie, I love you, and power to the people. Amen.
Although our history has many women that are worthy of celebration, at this time we just selected a number of women, and that doesn't mean that they're a priority, but rather those are the ones that we in fact decided to celebrate at this event. So with that, first one is going to be our Marion Pitts, top member of course, who's going to talk about Ida B. Wells Barnett.
needs to be more written about her.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you know, she was fierce. So for those of you who've not seen, know who she is, haven't seen a picture, this is she. You know? Okay, very beautiful. Okay, and also thank you, Alfreda, because she forwarded, she provided me with a copy, because otherwise I was going to have to take down my my framed picture of her and bring it and hang it up here.
You want to hand it over here?
Yes, well, you can. Okay, so I guess you're gonna have to pull, you know, you're gonna have to pull me. Okay, she got me on the timer. She got me on the timer because there's a whole bunch of information that I would like to provide in regard to Mrs. Garnett. She was born in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, to Jim or James Wells and Lizzie or Elizabeth, and I at the moment forgot her maiden name. She was the first of 7 children that lived, and she was taught by those parents the value of education. She went to the Shaw University, which was the Freedmen's Bureau School, and which became Rust University. Within that environment, and of course, the school was supported by a church organization, and at the moment the name escapes me. And within that environment, her home, she was taught that she needed to read, she needed to understand, she needed to communicate that information that she had to people who had less skills than she, and she had to serve her community. One of the things that she needed to do was make sure she read the Bible, which she did. Unfortunately, as happens with lots of us, at age 16, and okay, the date escapes me at the moment off the top of my head. At age 16, she lost both of her parents to yellow fever. She wasn't in town, she was out of town, and she came back to town, and they said, you know, your parents are gone. And essentially what she was confronted with was a group of concerned citizens from the community as well as from the Masons, and they had a plan, and they told this 16-year-old girl what they were going to do with her younger siblings and her. Okay, and which kind of tells you a little bit, just a small bit about her. Just imagine a 16-year-old who, in 1880 something, confronted by all of these adults, and they're telling you that you got to put your sister in, you know, institutionalize her because she had a disability, which in terms of viability of working and that kind of thing was not a good fit. They were going to take your younger sisters and separate them and have different people raise them. and then tell you that your brothers, of course, are going to be apprenticed to carpentry, which was what her father's profession was. She told him, no. You're not going to take my brothers. You're not going to take my sisters. I'm going to keep everybody that I can. And essentially they had to, stand behind that. So because of her education so far, it was identified that she could be a teacher. And that's what she did. So she took tests, and she was able to accumulate greater skills in order to pass tests, and in order to be able to teach at various school districts. So in terms of where she taught in Tennessee, she taught in California, Arkansas, and in another state. And she did that, and the younger siblings went to stay with an aunt, and she went and traveled in order to go to her teaching assignment during the week, and then come home on the weekend in order to do all the supplementary support stuff that needed to happen in order to support younger siblings. Well, as a process of traveling back and forth, particularly where she lived with her aunt and her younger sisters in Tennessee, she traveled on the train. I only have a minute left. Yeah. Shoot. Okay. All right. So anyway, because of of segregation, she was traveling on the train, and they had to tell her that she had to go to the colored people section. Well, this Victorian lady who paid her full fare got off the train rather than go to the color section where the people were smoking. The white men went to smoke in there, and all the colored people were all in there as well. And she said, well, I don't want to do that. So moving very quickly on, in Tennessee, she became a teacher, but she also then decided to purchase a newspaper, the Free Speech, which became the Free Speech. And with this, the advertisement and the discussion of activities that were going on in the community, one of the things that occurred was that, come on. One of the things that happened was, we're getting to the lynching part. One of the people who that she knew had been lynched in Memphis, and she got on her horse and she started writing editorials to the point where there was an exodus of people from Memphis, from Tennessee, out, because she quoted the gentleman's last words. And he said, listen, you got to get out of here. If you can't, you can't be treated as in a humane way, you got to go. So this began her pursuit of investigation, writing, and oration. She went to England twice to bring forth this message, as well as, including additional information to her record, one of which is this book, The Red Record, identifying lynchings throughout the country. she was very successful in trying to get the community in Britain to talk with their corresponding congregations in the United States, because at that moment there weren't a lot of those congregations that were stepping up and defending the rights of African Americans in this United States. With that, as well as lifelong communication with a mentor, Frederick Douglass, she was able to communicate some of this information out there, and this became, again, a lifelong pursuit, to the point where she would get a letter asking her to come, and when she was married, she had to get she had young children, so she and the young child would get on the train and go and investigate what the situation was. And even in very perilous situations that she went to, she was, as I say, she was fierce. And I really, just having done my research for this this presentation, I really say that she is worthy of great study, great investigation, teaching young people about, again, this Victorian lady, this little Victorian lady, who also carried a pistol.
All right. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I know it's hard because there's a lot of information on these women, and sometimes trying to capture it all in a short period of time is hard. But that doesn't mean that we can't continue at later times. Next, we will have Frida Coachman-Daniels, who will talk about Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank the Pops Women Academy and the Pop Council for giving me this opportunity to speak about the life of Mary McLeod Bethune. To start off, in the audience, raise your hand. What do you know about Mary McLeod Bethune? Tell me something you know about Mary McLeod Bethune. I hope you know something. Educator, good. Anything else? Okay, excellent. Anything else? Zaid?
A last will and testament to young people is a must-have for every black family.
Okay, thank you. Aminu?
I grew up in the segregated South, but Mary McLeod Bethune was a living legend. And at that time, it was called Negro History Week, not Black History Month. You didn't go by that, but without giving reports on Mary McLeod Bethune, that's all that was.
Okay, thank you. During my research, I found out that she was a missionary as well. I didn't know that. As an aside, I can relate to Mary McLeod Bethune as being my kindred spirit, meaning she was an educator, I'm an educator. She was a missionary, I'm a missionary. She sold sweet potato pies, I sell potato salad. Mary McLeod Bethune was born July 10th, 1875 in Maysville, South Carolina. Her parents were former slaves, as were most of her brothers and sisters. She was number 15 of 17 children. When she was 11 years old, she entered a school established by a missionary from the Presbyterian Church. She walked 5 miles to and from school every day. As a youngster, I lived down the street from the school and couldn't get there on time. And I complained about that. So imagine walking to school 5 miles back and forth each day. Mary spent her evenings teaching everything she had learned, and she shared it with her brothers and sisters. When I was young, a young adult, I used to take the neighborhood kids to the library and the museum. I didn't drive, so we got on the 24 bus and we went down to the museum and the library. I've always wanted to be a teacher. I knew since the 1st grade I wanted to be a teacher. You know, when you were in grade school, they asked what you want to be, and I knew then I had a desire to be a teacher. Mary McLeod Bethune was very charismatic, alert, and was popular with her classmates who looked to her as a leader. After graduation in 1893, she entered the Moody Bible Institute, which is located in Chicago, Illinois. She wanted to become a missionary in Africa. However, she was denied because blacks were not permitted to serve by the Presbyterian Church. But you know what? Mary McLeod Bethune, she was not deterred. She refocused her efforts. She realized that Africans in America needed Christ in school just as much as Negroes in Africa. So she visited the prisoners in jail, and she was an inspiration to them. She used to sing songs, okay? She worked at the Pacific Garden Mission serving lunches to the homeless people, and she also counseled the residents of the Chicago slums. I didn't know that, yes. She also worked at the Kendall Institute in Sumter, South Carolina in 1897 and 1898. There she met and married Albert Bethune, and they had a son. Her devotion and passion was so great that caused problems in the marriage, and she and her husband eventually ended up breaking up, separating. Yes. Yes, she had a desire. Uh-huh. In 1904, Bethune saw the need for education to improve the lives of people looking for work. She began her career in education when she rented a 2-story house in Daytona Beach, Florida, and began the difficult task of establishing a school for African American girls. This was an era when most African American children received little or no education. The Daytona Literary Industrial School for Training Negro Girls was begun in October 1904 with 6 students, 5 girls, and her son made up the school. There was no equipment. Sounds familiar to the teachers in the audience? She had no equipment. So what do? Improvise. Okay? She used crates for desks, charcoal for pencils, and the ink came from crushed berries. Yeah. She was very resourceful. As a teacher, you have to be. Right, Betty? At first, Mary did everything herself. She wore many hats. She was a teacher, of course. She was the janitor. She did some cleaning. Okay, she handled administrative duties and so forth. Okay, she baked pies and made ice cream to sell to the nearby construction workers. As the school at Daytona grew, it needed more money to run, so she asked James Gamble of the Procter & Gamble company to help her, and he did. Okay. Let me fast forward since I know I'm running out of time. Let's see. Mary McLeod Bethune, she had a school, and it was called the Bethune-Cookman Collegiate Institute, which was later named the Bethune-Cookman College. Okay, she served there until her retirement in 1942. And as you can see, Mary McLeod Bethune, she was a very involved woman, and she didn't need anything else on her plate. She had enough. But she found time to be involved with the National Council of Negro Women, and she became its president. She was the founder. By 1955, membership grew to over 800,000. She was the vice president of the NAACP. She helped President Roosevelt, and that's when she became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. In closing, I would like to affirm that Mary McLeod Bethune's legacy continues, because that was evidenced last May at the graduation when the students got up and turned their backs on Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education. Power to the people, they did. Those students had enough knowledge and research about their founder, and they knew that the remarks that Secretary DeVos made would be upsetting, to say the least. The remarks she said about the HBCUs, and some of the students even remarked she has no record for public education. She doesn't even have an educational degree, so how is she the Secretary of Education? Can I get amen? So I was very proud of those students. She has a monument, a statue in Washington, D.C. She's the first woman to be recognized to get a monument, and they're thinking of erecting a monument in Florida. She died, I had that down here. Oh, can't remember my writing. Well, she's buried at Bethune-Cookman College on the campus. Thank you for your attention. And those of you who got the answers right, I have a treat for you.
My presentation is on Septima Poinsett Clark. Probably one of the best educators that existed. She was born in Charleston, South Carolina, during a time when white supremacy was at its height right after Reconstruction. Her father was born a slave. Her mom was proud not to have been a slave. And in Charleston, South Carolina, you had a group of the black bourgeoisie who, if you were born into slavery, you could not be part of their group. But the biggest part for Septima was the fact that I think the church, and that's one of the things sometimes we don't give credit, some people don't give credit to the black church, but the black church has been a foundation relative to education, because it set the standards in terms of what the expectations were for young people, and they guided them through that process in such a way that they actually started giving them responsibilities at a very early age. Her education, she attended public school for the first year, but she was moved to a private school, and then you had, right after Reconstruction, you had women that either went into teaching or they were working in people's houses. So with that, her mother was her father, even though he was uneducated, her father believed in education. One of the things that she learned from her father was tolerance of people. From her mother, she learned how to deal with individuals, because mother, even though we were living in the South, I mean, she was living in the South, the mother still kind of put standards relative to interacting with some of the white people in that neighborhood. She then went to, she moved and she ended up in Avery at one point where she graduated. And one of the things about coming out of that kind of a school, it was one of the first African free schools that actually provided services for blacks. when she first started there was white teachers. The other issue that was also going on down in Charleston was that black teachers could not teach in Charleston, South Carolina. They were delegated to the rural areas. She ended up in St. John's Island, where she had a class. There was two of them, two teachers, and she was the principal teacher. They had 130 kids in a two-room place, yet you had white teachers in other sections who had 3 students in brand new buildings. There was a difference in salary. They never got paid what they were worth. The other thing too is that the NAACP in her life played a very significant role, because one of the things about the NAACP was that they would come in and support whatever those issues were. As an educator, poinsettia, I call it poinsettia, sometimes I call it Septima, really one of the things that I think made her very successful was the fact that she learned that in order for you to be able to teach us, you have to take people where they're at. One of her things was when she started dealing with trying to get, because one of the things was trying to get people to vote. And in her assessment, that unless you taught literacy, there was no way that you really could get people engaged in that whole educational process around voting and registration. So at St. John's, a lot of times she spent a lot of time working with people at their level, with the farmers, with the people who were working in the house, and in doing that, she gained their respect. Because one of the things that they had moving into St. John was, here come the city people, and they had certain kind of attitudes because they believed that people who were educated did not necessarily understand that. But she was able to develop that platform. From there, she fought on behalf, as part of the NAACP, to try to get equal pay. She was terminated because what they said, what happened was after the law came where they could not discriminate because of people were members of the NAACP, the city itself changed some of the statutes where they indicated that being a city worker, you could not be part of the NAACP. So that's when you also start to see a lot of drops. One of the things is that she was one of the few people, because she sent letters out to 720 some odd teachers, black teachers, and a lot of them never got involved in that process, because if you got engaged in whatever that movement was, you got fired. And so you really didn't have an opportunity to work, and you had to move out. Then she ended up going to Highland Folk School, where she started teaching organizing around citizenship. And in doing that, one of the things that she was able to do is to go back to different places and work in terms of engaging people and inviting people to come up and being able to teach them in terms of what went in. But one of the things, an example in terms of how she would teach, was in working with one of the one of the people in St. John's Island. All that the guy wanted to do was just to learn how to read his daughter's letter. A lot of them could not write, so she taught them how to write. And also in terms of, as part of the civic school, she taught them that it was important, not just in terms of understanding how you register and how you vote, but also the process that goes into selecting people. She fought, because at one time, there's so much information, it's very hard to kind of, but in Charleston, South Carolina, blacks could not vote in the primary. There was a judge who supported that move in terms of getting them, so they were able to get blacks to vote in the primary because they found it was illegal. She traveled, she had an opportunity to study with W.E. Du Bois down in Atlanta. She received her bachelor's degree, her master's degree. She was always in it. Every summer she would go to Columbia University to get courses on how to better teach and work with her students. I mean, so she was always a constant educator. And when they moved to, then she met Dr. King at the Highland. And then she also went to work with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And then they took over the Highlander because the Highlander was, quote unquote, labeled as being a communist entity. So there was a lot of struggle around that. So eventually they moved to school and they ended up continuing and registering. In fact, under her, it was her Andy Young, and Dorothy Cotton that really did a lot of work around mobilizing people in the South, in Alabama, Georgia, and some of the other states. And because of their work, there was a rise in terms of the registration, in terms of voting and getting people engaged. One of the things that I think that we need to really reflect on is if we want to get people engaged in the voting and registration process, we have to go where they're at. We have to listen to what their needs are. And we have to work from the ground up. And we don't use the model that was put in place, because the models are there. It's just in terms of us really looking at it in terms of how we're going to handle it. But again, there's a lot to Septima. I'm glad that I had an opportunity to, talk about her. And that's it, because my time is up.
No introduction.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Ella Baker. Next is Dr. Willa Cofield, who's a member of POP and also with the Black Women's History Conference. Willa, in addition to working and to being a very active member of POP, she also does a lot of work around Blackness in terms of women and organizing in terms of her breakfasts and where, again, education continues. So again, on Ella Baker, Dr. Willa Cofield.
I've been trying to get Nerve to start my presentation with Ella's song. So if you know Ella's song, join in with me. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of a black man, a black mother's son, is the same as the killing of a white man, a white mother's son. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Well, I am deeply honored to be part of this panel and to work with these really incredibly brilliant and wonderful women. And to be, most of all, I guess, to represent Ella Baker, whom I deeply admire. And the thing about Ella Baker is I really knew Ella Baker. I really knew her, and I found some notes when I was trying to get my little talk together I made after I talked to her. Wow. So I met her in 1965 when I was in North Carolina, and she came to my home and I heard her speak. And then about 5 years later, she visited me in New Jersey. Wow. And I was living in family housing on the Rutgers campus in a duplex with a space heater and plastic at the windows. And she said to me, "You have risen in the world." Because in North Carolina I had a nice home, and I was quite a different person. So I remember those words a lot, because I still live in a kind of a raggedy house, and I think about what Ella Baker told me, that my move from a nice brick ranch house to a two-family duplex was actually rising in the world. So Ella, I invited her to speak at Livingston College. This was about 73. She was fascinated. She was thrilled. She said, "I didn't know there was any place like this in the world," because the students were so students at Livingston were so militant, and they were doing things at the graduation service that just, showed that they had no respect for the white administrators. And so she really loved being there. And she spoke at the Black Graduates Breakfast, and I had a chance to introduce her. And I introduced her as the founder of SLIC. And she told me she didn't think Julian Barnes would be too happy with that introduction. So I also visited her home. She lived in the Lennox Apartments. Many of you know where they are, 135th Street in New York. And I went to see her on the day that Fannie Lou Hamer was being buried. And I was surprised that she was not going. And she said, oh, I went when it made a difference. She said, a lot of them are running down there now just so they can be in front of the television cameras. But I went when they were trying to organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. I went and worked. And that was the kind of woman that Ellen was. Because the time runs out, but very quickly when you're standing up here, I want to say the thing that connected all of her activities throughout her life was her love, her faith, her belief in the people. And she could see qualities in people that they couldn't see in themselves. She could see leadership abilities, and she did what she could to nourish those abilities and those qualities. And she ran into conflict with a lot of the male leaders because she wanted, for example, when she was working with the NAACP, she wanted to spend the money training the people in the branches. Walter White wanted to spend the money to build his reputation so he could fight the big white corporate executives and the power people. So the same thing happened when she worked for SCLC. How many of you know that she was the one who actually organized the SCLC? She worked for 2 years organizing SCLC. She said they didn't even give her an office. She had to go in the basement and use the coin telephone. And she was not afraid of, Dr. King and the people who ran the organization. And in the little interview I did, she said, I didn't believe in doing things simply because the good doctor said that they should be done. So that, brought her into competition. She wanted them to spend money on training leaders, and then they had other purposes. So my time is almost up. I can tell you she was born in 1903. She was born December 13, 1903. Really? My granddaughter's birthday. She died on December 13, 1986. She died on her birthday. And I went to her funeral. It was at Abyssinia Baptist Church. And Stokely Carmichael was there, and most other people who could get there, who were involved in the movement. And at one point they asked everyone to come up front who was one of Ella's children. And it seemed as if a third of the church got up and went up to the front. Because she was called the Mother of the Revolution. So that is my...
To have been in their presence. But our Dr. Willa Cofield is our legacy. Next we have the Honorable Councilwoman Donna Williams, who will speak on Shirley Chisholm.
Chairman, are you by the lights?
Yes.
I just saw it. Not yet, at the appropriate time. I just want to give you a signal. Okay. I just want to make sure the projector is on. It's too high. Okay. Sorry, can you come? No, that's good. It should be autofocus. If we turn the lights out, it'll autofocus. That's good. Okay. Again, I have the pleasure of discussing Shirley Chisholm and, oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was in, yeah. Good evening, everybody, and power to the people. So tonight I have the pleasure of discussing the Honorable Shirley A. Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, A. Chisholm, was born on November 30th, 1924, and she went on to glory on January 1st, 2005. She was an American politician, educator, and author. In 1968, she became the first black woman elected to the United States Congress. And she represented New York, the 12th Congressional District, 7 times, and she was reelected for 7 terms, from 1969 to 1983. And I just want Shirley to tell you who she is in her words. Okay. You ready? Can we get another one? I think it's up here. Where's it at? Okay, there we go.
Shirley Anita St. Hill was a little girl who was 3 years old when her mother took her to the island of Barbados in the West Indies. My father's name was Charles. He was a Union man, very much a Union man. And he was also a Garveyite. He used to tell me about the great Marcus Garvey from Jamaica. And he used to tell me about the politics that was going on at that time. I learned a lot about Roosevelt because he adored Franklin Delano Roosevelt. For the first 2 to 3 months, I was miserable. The gentlemen did not pay me any mind at all. When I would go to the lunchroom to eat, they would not sit at the same table as I did because of the black woman. Some of those men thought I had horns in my head because of what they had heard and thought about me. Of course, the media said she's a fighting woman. She doesn't take anything from anybody. So I think they thought I was coming down there really to take them on immediately. I was very, very unhappy, to be truthful about it. They all stood back, stood away from me. I felt that I was somebody coming out of the moon.
This is the CBS Evening News with former Cronkite. A new hat, rather a bonnet, was tossed into the Democratic presidential race today. That of Mrs. Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to serve in Congress.
For you today, as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. First time in the history of this nation, a person
sorry, in this church.
of color and a woman at that is running for the highest office of this land. And it's a wonderful thing to know.
Okay, go. You're almost at the end.
That in spite of the many obstacles in my path, that there's such a large cross-section of America who is behind me and saying, why not? Why not dare to dream like so many others have dreamt before me?
You can hit the light, but Larry. Yeah. And if we keep it, if we can keep it dim, because we're gonna come back to another one. Yeah, so you don't have to keep running. I mean, you're a runner though, so you can do that. So I think of to start off, I want us to think of Shirley Chisholm. She had many quotes, but there are a few that are very relevant and inspiring. And as for women, we probably keep this in our hip pocket. And one of her quotes was, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." And just to elaborate a little bit more, because that was just a summary I gave at the beginning, she was the first African-American congresswoman. In 1968, Shirley Chisholm made history by becoming the United States' first African-American congresswoman, beginning the first of 7 terms in the House of Representatives. After initially being assigned to the House of Forestry Committee. So they assigned her, I mean, from the door, as you heard her say, they treated her very, very, she was miserable, and you know that's a challenging state for anybody to be in. But they assigned her to the House on Forestry Committee, but she challenged it, and she went in there and she explained, "Listen, I'm in an urban district, if you will, Brick City. I serve not in the forest area. Why would you put me on this committee?" And she fought it. She brought and she was victorious in her fight. And going forward, to this date, when you're assigned to a committee, it has to be it has to be essential to the area that you're serving. You can't just serve on any committee. So little things like that, we don't think that people who made strong pathways for us to be in comfortable or relevant positions, and that was one of her first fights when she got there. Okay, it goes by so fast, and just so let me switch. Shirley Chisholm, and all part, and while in New York, she was a part of a Democratic. She had started a Democratic club for black elected members, and when she decided to run for Congress, those black members, and I wish I could have the picture because it was Congressman Rangel and others were in that room, and they told her that she could not run for Congresswoman, and that and they gave her a hard time. So again, our inner circle was the one that tried to hold her down, and then she went out, got women, Jewish committees, a lot of different committees, and explained to them what was going on with her, and they rallied behind her, and nevertheless she prevailed in the primary. Her parents, while Shirley was born in Brooklyn, her parents were born in Barbados. When she was 3 years old, her parents were very concerned and purposed that they were about her education. So they sent her back to Barbados with her grandparents, and she spent about approximately 6 or 7 years in Barbados doing her education there. In 1969, Shirley became one of the founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus. There is a famous picture standing on the steps, and you see 13 members standing there, and Shirley is one of those members. And we at POP go down to the ALC of the Congressional Black Caucus, and when you step into that presentation, I'm gonna do like our first presentation. She was the first. She was the founder of that. Wow. Let me just read 2 of her quotes, and I just want to close with her saying one of her last interviews. That's very short. In the end, anti-black, anti-female, and all forms of discrimination are equivalent to the same thing as anti-humanism. So she was a person first, and I want us to think about that. That there was, good Lord, I can't get to my notes, but George Wallace, he got shot, and against all of her close colleagues and everybody saying to Shirley, do not go see him, don't, he doesn't care about you or whatever. Shirley went to the hospital to see Mr. Wallace, and Mr. Wallace, George Wallace, when she got to the hospital, he said to her, what are you doing here? You're going to get shot. Nobody's going to, everybody's going to come against you. And what Shirley said to George Wallace is that, listen, God, this happened for a reason, and I'm here to let you know that you're a human and I'm a human, so I'm here to let you know that I'm thinking about you and praying you through this thing. There were 2 other videos, but I'm not going to do it, but one of the other things that I want to give you was that, and I can't get to it, is one of her other speeches, one of her other slogans. But what I want to say is that, and I'm sure for any woman, all of us, but especially women in elected office, this is especially a woman that we probably go to in terms of our ancestors to get, whether we're listening to her words, reading some of her printed material, to get encouragement, because still in this day as a woman you're probably left out there, or you're kind of looked upon less than your male colleagues. In my last campaign, this is my 3rd term, my campaign slogan in fact was "Unbought and Unbossed," and that was her campaign slogan when she ran for president. And I will tell you this, that when I asked my printer to do my card for "Unbought and Unbossed," he was like, "You gonna win." And I did it right in front of my picture, very inspired by her, in front of Orange City Hall, and "Unbought and Unbossed." And I just want to say that there's so much more. We need to do this again, regarding me more. And I wish I could have showed you the speech on her last interview. And she was also interviewed at Rutgers and at by Eagleton Institute, that many of us participate at the Center for Women in Politics. So I'll have the opportunity to come up, but I'd just like for you to hear from her perspective of how hard it was and how they treated her in the lunchroom and things like that. So when you see, I guess I'll say, when you see people that they're serving, realize that there's always a story behind their service. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna really was the only council person to support Donna Benita. He was on the different Can I add something to what Donna was saying?
Of course.
Many of you may not know that when the Honorable Shirley Chisholm ran for president, there was a very strong group of us who supported her. And she subsequently, Donna, what was the name of the organization?
Democratic?
No, it was the National Black Women something. It was a national organization. But she was in Newark on a regular basis. We were probably one of the top 3 states that supported her in terms of the participation of women. And when I ran in 1986, my first term, Connie Woodruff called her, and some of you remember Connie. Connie Woodruff called her and said, "Mildred's running for councilwoman." Shirley Chisholm came to Newark and endorsed me.
One of the things, we're going to continue, and then afterwards we can do additional questions.
No, that was just a statement.
Oh, no, that was mine. No, because it wasn't mine. No, I saw some hands in the back, that's what I'm saying. I don't want it. No, you were fine.
I'm sorry.
No, you were part of that crew. Our crew, yeah. There's also a reference. We also gave a reference page so you can refer to even the videos that Donna talked about. There's a website for it, so we did do references on the books that we use and other resources that we use for today.
Thank you.
Next we have Sandra Hayward, founder of the Popcorn Kids.
Yay!
And they're on their 60th, 64th.
64.
So you know, 64th, so you know there's energy there. She's going to talk about Coretta Scott King.
Good evening. Good evening. I hope all you guys can hear me, but I'm having a little asthma fit right now. And I got nervous, so it's making it even worse.
That's right, we're all nervous. We're with you. We're nervous about you.
Coretta Scott King. She was born July 27, 2000. I'm sorry. April 27, 1927. And she died January 30th, 2006. Coretta Scott King was one of the most influential women leaders in our world. prepared for her family, education, and personality for a life committed to social justice and peace. She entered the world stage in 1955 as wife to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was a leading participant in the American Civil Rights Movement. Her remarkable partnership with the King resulted not only in 4 children who became dedicated and caring for their parents' work, but also in the life devoted to the highest values of human dignity and service and social change. Mrs. King traveled throughout the world, speaking out on behalf of racial and economic justice, women and children rights, and lesbian dignity, religious freedom, the needs of the poor and homeless, full employment and health care, educational opportunities, and nuclear disarmament. She lent her support to pro-democracy movement worldwide and consulted with many world leaders, including Nelson Mandela. Born and raised in Maryland, Alabama, Claretta Scott graduated valedictorian from Lincoln High School and received her BA in music and education from Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. She then went on to study concert singing at Boston, New England Conservatory of Music. I'm going to cut this short because my chest is starting to hurt.
You have your medication?
Yeah, I have. I just wanted to say that even though her husband did not want her to be in the movement with her, I admire her for so much for having her 4 kids right up on the front line so that they could learn and see her going through the things that she was going through. And like at the program, I'll be telling kids, like when we do a lot of these programs, they always show like the older pictures of people. And I think when we do programs like this, we need to show the younger version of people so that these kids won't be thinking, you know, like every time something was done, it was done by older people. Because most of the things that were accomplished in this movement was accomplished by younger people.
That's right.
I'm so sorry I had to end on that note, but
thank you.
Next, we're going to have Vijay Dharmapudi, who's going to talk about Vandana Shiva.
Good evening. Good evening. So this evening I'm going to be speaking about Vandana Shiva. I first heard about Vandana Shiva on WBAI radio, and I thought how refreshing to come across an Indian activist who's also a woman. So Vandana Shiva was born in 1952. She's a physicist, a philosopher, and many people refer to her as an eco-feminist activist. One of the issues that caused me to learn more about her was when I heard that there was an alarming rate of farmer suicides that are happening in India. In the last 20 years, there are over 300,000 farmers who had committed suicide. And Vandana started bringing attention to these farmers and why these farmers were committing suicide. So in 1998, the World Bank structural adjustment policies had forced India to open its seed sector to global corporations like Cargill and Monsanto. So farmers had always put aside a small amount of seeds during following planting season. But once these corporations came to India, these corporations prevented seed savings through patent rights, enforcements, and engineering seeds with non-renewable traits. Because of these policies, farmers had to buy seeds each planting season, and when they bought these seeds, they needed to buy fertilizers and pesticides. Prior to 1989, most farmers grew multiple crops on their land. They grew different types of beans, millets, and vegetables. This helped their soil with biodiversity and helped them feed their families during difficult years. The Indian farmer had always had local varieties of cotton, but these were displaced by Monsanto's GMO, it's called BT cotton. Since Monsanto came to India, the price of seeds have gone up considerably. So the difference between GMO and GMO and indigenous seeds are indigenous cotton varieties can be grown with other food crops, but BT cotton can only grow by itself. Indian cotton is rain-fed, but BT cotton needs irrigation. Indigenous varieties are pest-resistant, but BT cotton end up creating new pests. And to control these new pests, they had to buy more fertilizers and pesticides. So with these high costs and unreliable output, this created a debt trap and a high suicide economy for these farmers. So with Vandana's activism, India started to cut royalties to local seed companies that had to pay U.S. agricultural companies like Monsanto for the second time in 2 years. The producers of these companies constantly threatened, saying that they're going to pull out of India. So in response, Vandana started a seed-saving bank called Navdanya, which means 9 seeds. Navdanya is a network of seed keepers and organic producers spread across 22 states in India. One of its goals is to shift from GMO and non-renewable seeds to organic and open pollinated seed varieties which farmers can save and share. A shift from chemical farming to organic farming, and a shift to fair trade based on real and just prices. The farmers who have made this shift are earning 10 times more than farmers growing in Monsanto. Another issue that made me really take notice of Vandana was how she took on those she accused of biopiracy, fighting all the way and winning on international courts through her group, which is called India-Based Research Foundation for Science and Technology. So in the 1990s, there were 2 US-based companies that tried to patent basmati rice and neem oil. These are Indian food and medicinal staples that have been around for thousands of years. So the European Patent Office granted the patent to the US Department of Agriculture, multinational W.R. Grace, in 1995. It took over 10 years, but the Indian government, which was led with Vandana's organization, successfully argued that the medicinal neem tree is part of India's knowledge over 2,000 years. So basically, she said a patent application should always be rejected if there is a prior existing knowledge about this product. But in the United States, prior existing knowledge is only recognized if it's published in a journal, not if it's passed down through generations of oral and folk tradition, which is a purely colonial mindset. So I wanted to end with this quote. One thing I liked what she said is, we need a new paradigm for living on the earth because the old one is clearly not working. So I just wanted to share, because I kind of, when I first came across her face, I was like, wow, this looks like my mom or my grandma. So it's like kind of refreshing to come across, you know, an Indian activist that looks like you and who's actually, so, thank you. Thank you, DJ.
Next, we're going to have Lisa Davis, who's a pop member and vice chair of the Black is Back Coalition. She's going to do Browder versus Gale. Plaintiffs Aurelia Browder, Susan McDonald, Claudette Colvin, and Mary Louise Smith.
All right, good evening, everybody, and it's always so great and honorable to be standing among my pop family, people in this struggle. People who are the fighters, people who our, future generations will be talking about what we did and to recognize the impact of action. I always must first start this out when we talk about women with the most remarkable and strongest woman and the first woman I'd ever met in my life, and that's my mother, Jean Davis, who was born on April 3rd. And growing up in the 60s as a young child, I would interpret a lot of the events and the things that were going on through the reaction of my mother. And of course, I cannot forget 50 years ago, April 4th, and her reaction, her response, a person I had never heard of before, when my cousin came into the room and said Martin Luther King Jr. had just been shot. And I knew by the way that she reacted in her response that this was something very serious. And I remember the next day seeing on the news all day long that this man, whom I don't ever recall seeing before, they kept showing his picture all over the place, and my attitude was like, who is he and why should I even care? Well, I was very young at the time, and I wanted to be an actress, never had any thought at all of taking up the civil rights movement, but here I am today, and that's the power of a seed. And when we think about Dr. Martin Luther King and his struggle, we know for a fact that it was the will of women, not just women, but it was the will and the struggle of black women who were so tired and who refused to continue to take the abuse that was being forced on their communities and their people. And because of the stances of some women, some people whose names we do not know, but he was catapulted into, the person that we know him for. And it is very imperative. There's no way that we're going to ever be able to say all the names of all the people who contributed and who made, that movement what it was. But we must understand that whenever we talk about Martin Luther King, whenever we talk about Rosa Parks, whenever we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, we must talk about Browder versus Gale. Many of us have never heard of that. Exactly. Browder versus Gale consisted of 4 plaintiffs. One of them, Claudette Colvin, who, when she was 15 years old, talking about the youth and children in this movement, when she was 15 years old, she was not the first person to be arrested on the buses, which, by the way, they weren't violating any ordinances because they were sitting where colored people were supposed to be sitting, but she was not the first person arrested. She was the first person to plead not guilty, and that's a key thing, but of course she was kicked off the bus. And a lot of people think that because the Montgomery Improvement Association and the people in Montgomery at that time decided not to really put Claudette Colvin forward in terms of organizing around her to break the backs of what was going on, they think that she sort of just disappeared. And we also know that she had become pregnant at a time when that was just considered too taboo to happen. We think she just sort of disappeared into the wilderness, but that's not the case at all. She became a part of this case, Browder versus Gale. Another woman who was one of the plaintiffs, she became the lead plaintiff in this case, was Aurelia Browder, who was 35 years old at the time and the mother of 21 children, 5 sets of twins and 2 sets of triplets. Yes, she graduated high school when she was in her 30s. She went on to graduate from the Alabama State University. She graduated with honors. She was a fighter in the movement. She participated in the rights for voting rights. She would drive people, to and from, the courts to register. She was very active before she stepped out on April 29th, 1955, and she was arrested and treated very, very badly. I'm not sure if she pled not guilty, but she was arrested. Then there was another woman who was in her 70s, Susie McDonald. And she looked like she could pass for white. She had blue eyes, very, very light skin. But she also was treated so badly on those buses. And she let it be known when she was on them buses, I am of the darker persuasion. I am with those people. And she was treated horribly. And then we also know of another person, Mary Louise Smith, whom we had the opportunity to also interview and to make contact with. The 2 of these people are still alive. This happened on October 21st, 1955. She was 18 years old, and she was going back and forth to, white person's home as a domestic, and they had refused to pay her, and they told her, well, you come back again, and we'll have your money for you. And she came back that morning, went across town, and nobody even answered the door for her. So she boarded a bus. She desperately needed her money. She boarded a bus to go back home, and she was told to get up out of your seat. And she said in her calm voice, no, although she said she remembers cursing at that point too. She may have done that. But she said no. And she became the second person to plead not guilty. And then, of course, we know what happened in December of 1955. But we really need to understand that there was a lot of preparation that was going on. And I just want to also say one thing. When we talk about the Montgomery buses and how badly people were treated, we got to understand it was more than just about get up and give somebody your seat. The abuse that was going on. Women would be beat, some of them even raped. There were people, not just women, but men even killed. They were fighting for their lives. And so you also had that was going on concurrently with this, because what happened with the case of Browder versus Gale, once the Montgomery bus boycott took off, you had attorneys who were saying, we need to challenge this, we need to break the backs of this whole system of segregation. And you had an attorney, Fred Gray, who was inspired and influenced by Brother Minique, when I was just talking about this earlier today, Charles Hamilton Houston. This is key. This is key. They were training, raising black people, African people in law school, were studying law to take on this racist, abusive system. So when the Montgomery boycott jumped off, you had attorneys that said, we got to take this further. And they didn't want to use the case of Rosa Parks because they thought it would be tied down into the state court. They wanted to take this on a federal level. So just real briefly, on February 1st, 1956, the case was filed, Browder versus Gale, Gale being the mayor of Montgomery at the time. His real name was William Armistead, of all names, Gale, but they called him Tacky. I think Tacky is a much, more accurate description of him. But anyway, they filed the court case in the federal courts. They filed it in the U.S. District Court in June. And the court ruled that enforced segregation, of black passengers and white passengers, that was totally, totally wrong, or that it was violating the 14th Amendment. So they sided with the people, surprisingly so, and they appealed it. But that's really the strategy that they wanted them to do, because then they could take this to the Supreme Court. And that is exactly what they did. This case, Browder versus Gale, went to the Supreme Court. I want to just say one other thing about those times. You risk your life putting your names on these cases. They went to many people. They asked, do you want to be a part of this case? Do you want your name on this case? And only 4, really, basically 4 said, we will do it. And Aurelia Browder, because her name, she was chosen to be the lead plaintiff. And what she went through, her son was saying that they received death threats and I think even bomb scares and stuff like that on their door. But she refused to back down. All of these women refused to back down. And on December 20th, the court decision came down by the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, not December 20th. November 18th, 1956, the Supreme Court upheld the district court's decision and basically said that the Montgomery bus boycott the Montgomery, that segregated bus seating violated the protection under the 14th Amendment. And it was really that case, even more so than the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, that really was the death toll to legalize segregation in this country. And I just want to read this one quote real quickly. Browder versus Gallup. Aurelia S. Browder, Susie McDonald, Claudette Colvin, and Mary Louise Smith. The lawsuit brought an end to the Montgomery bus boycott. It ended segregating seating, completely reversed Plessy versus Ferguson, and became the precedent used by attorneys to end all segregation ordinances in America. And so the court decision was, the Supreme Court had made their ruling on November 18th, and December 20th, I don't know why it took them a month to get the ruling to the city of Montgomery, but when that ruling was hand-delivered to the mayor of Montgomery, that is what ended the Montgomery bus boycott. So we owe a debt of gratitude to the plaintiffs in Browder versus Gale, and we thank them, and thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
And now we have Tamia McCormick, also a pop member, who's going to talk about the founders of the Black Lives Movement, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi.
All right. The new member.
All right, so I'm nervous, so I'm not going to hold it. I just want to start by saying I'm honored to be up here. Also, all roads lead to Newark. I'm working on a project. I was feeling very crazy about being at work. A lot of people that's my age, some of the men, they were so stressed out, trying to make it in life. They literally have bald spots. The women, hormonal imbalances, and have a loved one that went to a mental institution for a little. Sorry. So I started writing. Sorry, I don't mean to cry. So I go to an event and I heard Larry speaking, and he excited me. It's like, oh my gosh, he's so smart and he's gonna help the people. I had to interview him. So then he told me about POP, and I came here. There's also a gentleman named Dr. Sheets, and he he's a part of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Yes, they went to college together. And his focus is also Newark, other environmental justice communities, trying to make sure you have healthy air, healthy water, and people can survive. So just being here and having everything connected back to here, it makes me feel good. Because I'm not from here, I'm from South Jersey. Okay, so my presentation on Black Lives Matter, forgive me, I didn't memorize it, or like everybody else, but I'm going to read it. Okay, so my presentation will be done to commemorate the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. I chose these three women because I believe it's just as important to pay homage to the living as it is to pay homage to those that came before us. The fight for justice has been happening since before we reached the shores of America, and yet compared to the Civil Rights era, the conditions of African Americans today is dramatically worse when it comes to the gap between blacks and whites in education, distribution of wealth, environmental justice, and the list goes on. Alicia, Patrice, and Opal are not strangers to these societal perils. In fact, the Black Lives Matter movement was birthed from a long history of personal struggle from its founders. Patrice was raised by a single mother and lived in Section 8 housing with her sister and 2 brothers. She watched her brothers get habitually harassed by the police. In her novel, When They Call You a Terrorist, she recounts the police roughly throwing her 11 and 13-year-old brothers against the wall, pulling their shirts up, making them turn out their pockets, and aggressively touching their young bodies. As she describes it, much like a rape victim, they never told anyone, simply holding the shame and horror inside. This, as well as traumatic prison experiences, led to her brother Monte, who was badly beaten and forced to drink toilet water while in prison, to eventually have the mental disorder schizoaffective. Her father was a drug addict that was often incarcerated and never received sympathy from society or afforded rehabilitation the way modern-day white opioid addicts are now receiving it. Instead, he was greeted with imprisonment, the disenfranchisement that stems from it, the inability to overcome, and he died from a heart attack in a homeless shelter. The accumulation of all these hardships created in Patrice a deep longing for justice within Black communities, and her ultimately becoming a community organizer. So when Alicia Garza, a fellow organizer and special projects director for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, decided to write a love letter to Black America, which read, "Dear Black people, I love you, I love us, we matter, our lives matter, Black lives matter." After George Zimmerman's acquittal in 2012 for the murder of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, Patricia Caller added the hashtag Black Lives Matter to the Facebook post, and Opal Tometi reached out shortly after, offering to build a social media platform that will uplift every aspect of the Black community by building a space where people could tell their truths, strategize, and collaborate for freedom. From there, a movement was born. The Black Lives Matter hashtag went viral, and they were able to transfer the energy from online to the streets to protest the numerous police brutality cases, such as the fatal shooting of 17-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The habitual acquittals of police officers left Blacks feeling powerless beyond measure and angry, but they were able to give people hope with one slogan: Black Lives Matter. Their organizing afforded them a whirlwind of publicity that served as a catalyst for renewed global interest in issues that affects Black people. The systematic oppression and pillage of Blacks, as well as Black resistance, isn't new, but Black Lives Matter tactics were. The founders created a national coalition that focuses on protesting state-sanctioned violence and anti-Black racism, while simultaneously addressing patriarchal domination by intentionally making a commitment to place those at the margin closer to the center. This meant centering leadership around Black women, Black queer people, Black trans people, Black immigrants, and Black people with disabilities. This is revolutionary because Blacks that were silenced even within their own communities now have a platform in ways that never existed before. Instead of a top-down patriarchal structure, these women managed to build a strong global member-led organization that embodies the courageous elder Ella Baker's credo: strong people don't need strong leaders. Because they taught people leadership, each founder is able to fight for the well-being of Black people in the realm of Black Lives Matter organization, but also through their own individual pursuits. Opal, the daughter of immigrants, works to improve the lives of African Americans, Afro-Latinos, African, and Caribbean immigrants as the executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Early this year, Alicia Garza announced a new initiative, the Black Futures Lab, which aims to develop strategies that help Black people imagine the political, social, and economic alternatives needed at the local, state, and federal level, while also building a political power needed to implement those alternatives. And Patrice remains at the realm of the Black Lives Matter movement while simultaneously focused on performance art. The founders of Black Lives Matter are women of courage because every day they sacrifice in order to bring dignities to Black people. They see a need and meet it. They eloquently articulate both the problems facing Blacks as well as ways in which we can begin to solve those societal ills. Fear often lingers in the minds of the oppressed, but the hardships of the Black Lives Matter founders face served as a catalyst for propelling their dreams of liberation for Black people around the world. Despite them knowing this country used our bodies for capital gain for centuries, This country built a sophisticated police force specifically to provide cheap labor and jobs for white communities, intentionally made housing policies to keep us in poverty, killed many of our great social justice heroes, and so much more. Alicia, Patrice, and Opal continue the legacy of resistance with grace. These black women are powerful beyond measure, and we must support them in their pursuits as they fight on behalf of all black people. They have great respect for the black women that laid the path for them to be able to launch the modern day civil rights struggle in the 21st century. I'll leave you with these last words read by Alicia Garza at San Francisco State University regarding the courage and resilience of black women. Were it not for black women, there would be no Underground Railroad, no one to campaign against black bodies swinging from trees like the strange fruit. There would be no protest songs like that came from the toes, through the womb, up through the lungs, and out the brilliant mind and mouth of Nina Simone. There would be no black women voting like the 96% of us who did vote and said hell no to this administration. Right. There would be no America if there would be no black women. That's right. If there were not black women. There is no ode to black. This is an ode to black women because black women are magic. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Right. Now, we have a short period of time. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our panelists. Another round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is what sisterhood is about. Now, any questions? Okay, if not, we're thinking we're going to do a part 2. We just haven't decided when. Right?
I just was listening to my favorite radio show, the Karen Hunter Show, yesterday. And as we know that Stephen Clark is in our forefront, in Sacramento, the most recent case that happened. And as you know, when black faces, we go through this, the first thing they go back and they do is they dig up history to kind of discredit him or the situation, or discredit him as a victim. And they found some negative things that he has said pertaining to black women. Black women, just in general. But I think that the what came out of it, because it was a discussion, is that one, that all of us got to remind this generation, our babies, that this social media, it just follows you. It's permanent. So the having a conversation of what you post, it just comes back. And the other thing is just to be mindful, to sit down so they can understand, as this to me is said, that, you know, when you look into, like, especially for us, into domestic violence and things like that, you have to realize that black women hold things down. And now we have even come out of our communities. We are electing people. We are just making changes. We are the highest voters, and we're doing dynamic things that people are very dismissive about. So I just said that Black Lives Matter, but the role of the black woman is so serious. And I just thought about what Lisa was saying about women during the civil rights movement, how they were not in the forefront. And it was just a tribute probably about 2 months ago about the women and how they were very instrumental in getting the mills, and because they weren't down the front, but they got the mills, did the cooking and all of that. So those essential things that we must remember, that those are the things that keep things moving. So the honoring of us is sincere.